So, Asha, is Trump able to throw the entire election into chaos?
Eh, it's complicated. I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal contributor for ABC News.
And I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And I'm Norm Eisen. I'm a longtime election law litigator, among other topics, and a writer, an analyst, and a legal commentator for CNN.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down into a soundbite or a tweet. Thank you, Norm, for joining us. I know that you have been running around putting out election law fires, and that's what we want to talk to you about today. So we're so glad that you have taken the time to join us.
With pleasure. I love to come on to It's Complicated, but I think you should have a special title in response to your question about whether Trump can cause chaos, at least when it comes to outcome determinative chaos. It's not complicated. I worked on the Electoral Count Reform Act. I testified in the Senate and contributed to the shaping of that legislation. And since the attempted coup of 2020, federal and state laws have been transformed to prevent the kind of mischief making that Trump undertook in 2020. So, bluff, bottom line up front, a lot of the ways that he made mischief in 2020, they're no longer open to him. And that's good news.
Wow, that's great. That's better news than I expected,
great
Norm.
News.
Yeah. I'm coming off of a trial, kind of out of a vortex for a couple of months, and I'm like, okay, this looks very bad. Looks like Trump's going to create a lot of problems, and I'm glad we have you on to explain otherwise.
Your podcast listeners know that I'm not only a friend of the pod, but I'm a friend of Renato's and Asha's. And when Renato went into his trial vortex, the black hole, like he had no gray in his beard. He's like Rip Van Winkle. He emerged on the other side of this trial with a white beard.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Like Santa Claus now. Yes.
Do you also put this video up, or is it just
We do.
Yeah, so everybody can see. The guy was a young man. He had this trial in Los Angeles. We didn't hear from him for months.
And here I am.
And here you are. Yeah. So maybe why don't we first start with the Electoral Count Act then? Maybe do a recap of what was attempted in 2020, how you shored up the Electoral Count Act. I have some questions based on my understanding of it because I guess let me pause here. Norm, you are Happy Panda, usually.
Usually, it's
and
true.
Renato is Sad Panda, so I'm just here to navigate the middle. My understanding is that the ECA, though it corrected for some things, is now a little bit more complicated and maybe has some provisions that could be ambiguous or at least are untested. So I just want to kind of dive into that. So let's first start with 2020 and the legal plot that John Eastman cooked up then with the state legislatures. Like what were they trying to do? Let's first understand what that plan, that conspiracy was.
Under the Constitution and laws of the United States, the way the presidential system works is that we actually vote for a slate of electors of the candidates, and then you tally up the votes in each state. There's a process where the precincts and the ballots to the counties count them up, the counties certify who won in that county. They send that usually to the Secretary of State. Secretary signs off, and then the Secretary of the State sends it to the governor. Governor signs certificates of ascertainment, and the electoral slates are transmitted to Congress. January 6th, Congress opens the electoral slates from the states, counts up the number of electors, and a winner is proclaimed. Trump lost in 2020, so in order to try to overthrow this system, he asked the states to recognize the electors for the losers. He pressured the states in various forms. Ultimately, in most of the states, in all of the 7 key swing states that cycle, there were alternate electoral slates, even though he lost. Now, in many of those places, there have been criminal prosecutions. In a couple, like in Pennsylvania, in New Mexico, those electors put an asterisk on their materials. They said, this is only to be used if the courts say Trump won. In other places, they were pretending that Trump won, even though he lost. In Georgia, in Michigan, in Nevada. That's crazy. And, it's like passing counterfeit money. John Eastman was one of the lawyers. He's been prosecuted. And Ken Chesebro's been prosecuted. Both of them have lost their bar licenses because they did this. It's like, it's as if I'm here in my daughter's room, she went off to college. It's been converted to my home office. It's like I took her old crayons when she was a kid and I made her my own $20 bill, and went down the block to the 7-Eleven to spend it. It's counterfeit. I mean, that's what happened in 2020. Now,
can I pause for 1 second?
Yes, of course.
The obvious illegality of that was that there was a certified slate that had been sent. In other words, these people met these fake electors. They came up with this alternate slate, but there was no official government backing for any of them, as far as I understand. Right?
They were holding themselves out as legitimate,
but they had no stamp of authority.
Right? They're making a false statement by doing so. That's what Norm is, I think.
Yeah, I'm just saying, because I want to contrast it with the rules changes and then what could happen moving forward. Because Trump tried to pressure the legislatures to actually, I guess, approve the alternate slates. None of them caved.
He did. Trump tried, before he settled on this exact approach, he tried a lot of different ways to validate. Like, it's much worse in Michigan, for example. They signed electoral slates that say we met at the Capitol to certify, because that's the official language. But they didn't meet at the Capitol. They met in the basement of the Republican Party. So, it's much worse to just have the electors say we're the winners than would be to have the state legislature, at a minimum, some official imprimatur. So the first wave of Trump's assault was on the state legislatures to get them to endorse. But of course, they were too smart. They're like, are you crazy? We'll get prosecuted. So instead, you had not even many in Trump's own White House and campaign wanted nothing to do with this. It's so clearly illegal. So what ended up happening was that some campaign apparatchiks, you may have seen recently an email about Michigan, a Trump campaign advisor said, let them riot. He wanted violence in Michigan to create more of an atmosphere of chaos. That same guy was part of getting the phony electoral slates. And those were sent to Congress. Now, there was one last hope in this story. They failed with the state legislatures. They did get these phony documents forward. The last hope was that Mike Pence would recognize these as the official slates, or would refuse to recognize the winning Biden slates, enough of them to throw the election, say, oh, there's too many questions about Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. We're throwing everything out. Pence wouldn't go along with it. And that is where we never want to have anybody who'll do that. And that is where the Electoral Count Reform Act comes in. It makes clear, but it was already clear. Mike Pence didn't do it, but it makes even more clear the vice president's role is purely ministerial. He can't pick and choose. Second, to make that belt and suspenders, it says the governor's certificate signed by December 11th is the official certificate. And we had all those. We had an official certificate. And then there's a series of other safeguards that are put in this bill to prevent any kind of mischief. We were already safe. We had the terrible events of January 6th, but there was never a question after the AP called the race, the 4 days after Election Day on that Saturday. I'll never forget, there was a picture. I'm from Los Angeles. The single most indelible memory of that AP call was at the Union 76 station in Westwood, near the UCLA campus in Los Angeles. A spontaneous dance party erupted. Hundreds of students were playing music and dancing and celebrating because this nightmare had been resolved by a winner being picked by the AP. The AP is the most definitive presidential call among journalistic outlets. So at any rate, there's a series of other safeguards, but that's the rest of the story. We never want there to be any question, and that's why this new legislation has passed. So it's actually not that complicated. The winner is certified as the winner. That's the way it's supposed to work. And, Republican officials do the same thing in Georgia. Uber Republicans, Brian Kemp, the governor, and Brad Raffensperger, the secretary, withstood Trump's pressure, even in the old regime. How much more so in the new one?
Now, my question is this, though. Can legislators still muck things up? Because my understanding is that even Mike Pence was told by one of his advisors that if these alternate slates had somehow had the backing of state legislatures, it might have been an open question on what he had to do about them. And I know I'm just trying to understand the relationship between what the legislatures can do and what the governor, what the ECA says the governor has to do. What if the governor is aligned with some legislative shenanigans?
Yeah.
And when you get to the constitutional question, there is the idea that the Constitution gives the legislatures tremendous power to determine their elections, even though the Supreme Court did not embrace the independent legislature theory.
No.
I mean, they didn't. I don't know. I'm just wondering where this could go.
Yes, there are people, they're friends of ours, they're people you and I respect who says the sky is falling or the sky could fall. They're wrong. I testified on this bill. I've written extensively about the bill. I helped develop pieces of the bill. I study what's going on nationally. I've worked in Congress. I've done hundreds of cases over my 30-year career as an election lawyer. There's absolutely no reason to take those remote contingencies seriously. Voters can know that their vote will be safe, free, and fair, that voting is safe, free, and fair, that counting will take place, and that the winner will be certified as the winner. Sure, you can always say, oh, couldn't Congress object? But the bill dealt with that. Just give you one more example, Asha. It used to be that just one member of the Senate and one member of the House was enough to trigger. Now you need 20%. There are not 20% there is not 20% of the Senate that is going to go along with any of these crazy objections. There are not 20 senators. There might be 7, 8, 9, 10 Trumpy people. That's it. So it's very unlikely. Look, a giant meteor could strike the Earth on election day too. But, we're not like sending nuclear devices into orbit to blow up the meteor. These are very remote contingencies. And so I think it's a mistake to be excessively alarmist, to get, it will get you attention if you do it. But I think it's a mistake. And there's some very, very smart people who are asking that, but I think the answers are sufficient. So are there contingencies? Yeah, there could be, but it's extremely remote.
Well, yeah, I'm curious and to get your take, Norm, on a few things. I mean, I generally am of the agreement that we should not be trying to be alarmist in order to get attention. I don't do that. So I don't play that game. So, well, obviously, I think we would both agree that if an election in a particular state is close enough where some marginal differences regarding how ballots are counted matter, then the courts could get involved in that circumstance. And that's always been the case, right? Like this issue of provisional ballots in Pennsylvania, which might be 100, 500 ballots or 1,000 ballots. I think we would agree on that, right? But what I'm interested in, I'd be curious what you think about the United States Supreme Court, and how they could get involved. And we had this Fifth Circuit decision, which was totally outside the mainstream of election law, and how it's been determined for the last, hundreds of years of United States history, where they were essentially saying if a ballot isn't received by election day, it's not counted, which could have a very significant impact in certain states. What is your reaction to the potential, intervention of the United States Supreme Court here?
Well, take that Fifth Circuit case. It's not in the mainstream. The Supreme Court that same Supreme Court you're asking me about has repeatedly chastened the Fifth Circuit, as you know, across a wide array of issues. They've gone too far. It's a decision by an extremely as Trumpy a panel as you can get in the Fifth Circuit or anywhere in the country. But even they said, this decision will not take effect in the 2024 election. So even they knew that they were out on a limb. That case is not going to be the law of the land. I think the way you have to look at the Supreme Court is it is by the rule of threes. And let's look at the decisions, because recent decisions are often the best predictor. They made two very important decisions this week in a Virginia case and in a Pennsylvania case. And if you look at the Virginia case, you can understand both of the cases as saying, hey, we don't want to, they have this principle, the Purcell principle. We are not going to, we as the Supreme Court are not going to, we're going to call balls and strikes depending on the case, because the two cases came out very differently. In Virginia, the Supreme Court stayed a decision where there was a voter purge, only 1,600 voters, and the Supreme Court said, let the governor kick those people off the rolls. They can re-register if they want to. The Supreme Court disagreed with the trial court and with the Fourth Circuit. But there was an even more important case, more consequential, out of Pennsylvania, where it had to do with certain voters being able to cast provisional ballots if they messed up their mail-in ballot, the Genzer case. The Genzer versus Butler County, they have to be allowed to cast a provisional ballot. Pennsylvania, most likely tipping point state, these provisional ballots might or might not make a difference in the outcome in that state. There, the Supreme Court refused to touch the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision that provisional ballots should be given to those voters. So you saw there this rule of threes, the three liberals and the three in the middle, Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett, and Kavanaugh, together weren't interested in touching the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Renato, that's an important indicator of where we might be. Then even the other three.
But in Virginia, it was along ideological lines.
Virginia was a less good, but also a less important case. If they really wanted to mess with the outcome, they would have messed with Pennsylvania too. The Virginia, I had debates with my Republican election law confreres about this. Many of them felt that, I disagree, but many of them felt that in the Virginia case, the statutory provision that was being interpreted was a good faith argument for the conservatives. So I don't agree, but these are people of good faith that I'm debating with who said, you can't make too much of that. Whereas Pennsylvania would have been deeply disturbing. So in general, the election law field, the people who, like me, do this every 2 years. I've done it every 2 years, other than when I was in government and couldn't, for the past quarter century more. We breathed a sigh of relief because we took that Pennsylvania case as, even if you take them both together, the Supreme Court is not determined to interfere. They may still interfere, but they're not determined to interfere. This would have been the easy way to do it, much easier than doing it after the fact. So we'll see. I'm not relaxing. I'm on the edge of my chair. I don't have any faith in this Supreme Court after Trump v. U.S., but we'll see.
What about, Asha suggested earlier, I thought, Asha, you made a good point. What about a rogue state legislature? What about a governor that, let's just say, for example, that, Brian Kemp and the Republican legislature in Georgia is like, we've changed our mind. We're going to go for Trump this time. We've seen the writing on the wall. What then? When you have that sort of circumstance, won't that create a sort of drama in the United States Senate?
Well, under the Constitution and the ECRA, the federal law, there's no role for the state legislature. It doesn't say the governor or the state legislature. And the Supreme Court, whatever you want to say about them, they rejected this authority for state legislatures in Moore v. Harper, the independent state legislature doctrine. And it was raised again in that Pennsylvania case, and they weren't going for it, okay? So I'm not worried about state legislatures at all. I mean, that's like less than 1% worth.
But he's talking about if the governor is aligned. I mean, Moore versus Harper was a separation of powers issue between state legislatures and state courts, right? About who could determine essentially the enforcement of a state's own rule.
You still need to have a way to get the question before a state legislature. If Brian Kemp refuses, or Lombardo, the Republican governor in Nevada, if they refuse, they're going to be sued. In fact, it's going to be decided by the courts, not by the state legislature. There is a judicial review provision if a governor wrongly withholds or wrongly issues a certificate that does not reflect the votes of the people of that state. So I don't see how it even gets to a state legislature, but I also don't believe neither Lombardo nor Kemp are election deniers. Kemp has stood up to the most ferocious pressure in 2020. And I don't believe that he's going to openly flout the choice of the people of Georgia. Now, again, there's more remote contingencies, 1%, 2%, 3% contingency. What if it's a Bush v. Gore situation and it's super close? But even there, it's going to be heavy court supervision. The governor cannot just say, "Oh, too hard, state legislature, you decide." No, it's going to be decided by the courts. They're going to look at what were the votes, what were the certification. Georgia in particular has a very strong, very independent certification process, and both Kemp and Brad Raffensperger have shown a propensity to stand up to Trump. All the Republican governors did the same in 2020. Shoot, the state legislatures did the same too. I mean, we have, they were all interviewed by the January 6th committee, the Michigan legislative leaders, the Arizona legislative leaders, the Pennsylvania legislative leaders. They didn't buckle. So, that's not a likely contingency.
Well, Norm, you mentioned that you've been involved in election law disputes pretty much every election cycle. I have to believe that you're getting prepared for another set of election law disputes this cycle. So what are you getting prepared for? What are the battle lines going to be? What if we have a crystal ball and our listeners and viewers are looking ahead till a week or two in the future? What litigation are they going to be hearing about?
Well, if you look at the greatest likelihood is that there will not be outcome determinative post-election disputes, like all the litigation in the aftermath of Florida 2000 that I was involved in as a.
So you think it won't be close,
young lawyer.
Is what you're saying?
Even if it's close, will there be a state where it's close enough, it's a jump ball, you don't know who won, and it's going to be decided by election litigation? I'm level setting before I answer Renato's question. We've only had a very few of those in American history. We had 2020 wasn't one. We knew who won by Saturday. And indeed, we knew Biden was probably going to win because of the red mirage. There were all these uncounted blue mail-in ballots. So we knew even before Saturday. The last one we had in American history was 2000. That was Bush v. Gore. Then you have to go back 40 years to 1960. Then you have to go back almost 100 years for a truly agonizing contest to 1876. That gave us the Electoral Count Reform Act. It was passed in the wake of 1876. That's the notorious election in which the winner could not be chosen because it was too close, and Congress appointed a commission, and there was an unholy bargain, and the Democratic candidate, democracy, the Democratic Party then associated with the South, the Democratic candidate yielded in exchange for the end of Reconstruction, a devil's bargain in 1876. Then you need to go back another 76 years to the Burr-Jefferson tie, where you had a contingent election that was resolved in the House of Representatives. So these are 40, 60, 80-year floods, right, where it actually matters. Instead, what you have is a bit of a psychodrama that's being played out where people are ventilating. Last time it was Trump. He was never going to win that election after the AP call on Saturday. And he was just, that doesn't mean you don't have to take it very seriously. You do, you have to show up. You need an army of lawyers. So that now I will answer your question, Renato, with the greater likelihood that it's kind of a going through the motions exercise than an outcome determinative one like Bush v. Gore. You can expect extensive litigation in the states in roughly the same order that they constitute tipping point states. So the top tipping point state, the greatest likelihood that the outcome will determine the election, is Pennsylvania. And people assign various percentages to that. But even then, none of these are 100% guaranteed tipping points. So Pennsylvania, I think I would put after Pennsylvania, Michigan is the next closest, then Wisconsin. Probably when you get past those three, Arizona, just because it's more susceptible, some of the things that the excellent governor, secretary of state, and AG have tried to do there, because there's not a pro-democracy legislature, they haven't been able to get the same strong post-2020 legislation as Michigan put in. So, and then I'd go to, Arizona, Georgia. I'm just trying to rank them in order of litigation likelihood and tipping point likelihood. So I would say Georgia is next. Then you probably close out with Nevada and North Carolina. North Carolina is a very high risk, so maybe you should flip the order, because you have a strong governor, an AG. You don't have a secretary. You have an election board there, which is pretty good. But you have a crazy judiciary, a crazy Supreme Court, and a crazy legislature. So I guess I would say North Carolina number 6, Nevada number 7. And then in terms of what are you going to see? You will see challenges in Pennsylvania, fights about counting mail-in ballots and about voters, challenging, the eligibility of voters to vote. There'll be thousands of challenges in those two areas. Those have already been set up. The last day to challenge voters was Friday, November 1. So there's thousands of them that were lodged. They'll all be dismissed, but you have to deal with them. You might see a recount. You might see contests. You will see a ton of litigation over various rules issues. We are fastening our seatbelts. We hope there'll be no efforts like the Brooks Brothers riot, where you have violence that intrudes. That shut down the counting, the Brooks Brothers riot. So, the mere threat of violence can cause problems. So we're looking for that. And then the other thing you have to look for is the certification issues. I have a big publication of Brookings, the 50 counties most likely not to certify. We studied for months and we ranked the counties. We have like a heat map of the counties. Both of you have seen that. So, will some counties, either just because they're overwhelmed, will they miss their deadline? In Pennsylvania, it's November 25th. Or will they do it like Cochise County did in 2020 out of bad faith? They'll refuse to certify because they have these crazy Trump-led conspiracy theories.
And then what can you do in that case? Because also the ECA changed the safe harbor deadline. Isn't that right? Like it used to be.
There's no more safe harbor. There's gubernatorial certification on December 11th. That's conclusive unless a court says otherwise. And you have an abbreviated court challenge period, a 3-judge panel up to the Supreme Court. You have 5 days to challenge the governor. So that puts a lot of pressure on the courts to trust the governor's judgment. And as I've told you, I think even the Republican Governor Kemp demonstrated under pressure that he was not gonna declare the loser the winner. It's so crazy. If you refuse to certify, or if Kemp had done that, he would have been open to criminal liability. We've seen this non-certification, like Cochise County, Arizona. They would not certify in 22. Those county commissioners have been criminally prosecuted. That's a crime in all the states to refuse to do your public duty. There's civil remedies. You can go to court for a mandamus order, ordering them to certify based on the correct counts. And there's regulatory remedies. Like in Michigan, if a county refuses to certify, the constitutional officers of the state can certify instead. So we have plenty of remedies for non-certification. And that's why when I look at the history of it, how uncommon these close elections are, the stronger federal legislation changes that have been made, like in Michigan, to state law, existing state law, like mandamus and criminal prosecution, the history of the Brian Kemps and Brad Raffensperger's Republicans doing the right thing, the fact that there is no Mike Pence who can be pressured this time around to recognize the losing slates as the winners. The whole country is wise to Trump's tricks. I don't think that there's a very high risk. I'm ready for anything, but I don't think there's a very high risk of anything happening.
I will just push back on one thing with your historical examples, because one big difference now in the landscape that those historical examples didn't have was our information and social media landscape. And when we go back to 2020, the court challenges were not there so much for the actual substance, but to actually create the smokescreen to cast doubt, to generate a perception that the outcome was in doubt, even though the outcome was not in doubt. And I think that likelihood is even higher. So even if with all of these even if the rules are there, the very fact that counties could refuse to certify, that it'll go to court, it allows for another smokescreen. I think the potential for violence is much higher this time around because of the completely untethered reality that at least part of our population is living in.
Well, you're right. That is, you're right. That is a danger, but it's not an outcome determinative danger, Asha, because Trump is right on the bubble now of, a little less than, in my view, looking at these polls, a little less than half in the battleground states, and he's going to lose the popular vote, guaranteed. He's going to lose the popular vote nationally, or extremely likely, 90% likely. So you're talking about less than half the country who even support him to begin with. Not all those people are willing to believe disinformation and violence. They have different reasons for supporting him. I think one of the great, I think we all need to be, those of us who don't support him, need to try hard to understand, even if they don't want to understand us, we need to try hard to understand the different lanes of that support. There's millions of them that were Obama voters. Were they evil people when they voted for Obama? At any rate, he'll lose some with the disinformation and the violence. So now you're talking a minority of the country. It will be horrible. January 6th was horrible. I believe law enforcement, myself and the organizations, nonprofit, nonpartisan organizations that I work with have addressed thousands and thousands of members of law enforcement in public fora, speeches and whatnot over the years. I think law enforcement is ready for this and will push back on any attempted violence. So it's horrible, like January 6th was horrible, but there was, the vote was counted and we weren't ready. Now we're ready. The systems have been hardened. I don't think if the Brooks Brothers riot happened today that the vote counters would stop and there would be cops and others there to shut it down and arrest the people. So, I guess I agree with you about the risk, but I believe that risk is not going to be outcome determinative, to use that term yet again. That's what we're looking at. Do any of these risks have the capacity to derail democracy? And I think if it's clear that one candidate has won, that none of this is going to succeed to have a coup, an auto golpe. In 2020, it was a self coup. Now Trump he's not in the Oval Office. He's in a weaker position than he was in some respects in 2020. Yeah, he's infiltrated his people, like in Georgia. He put people on the Georgia State Election Board. Guess what? All those crazy Trump election sabotage rules that we've been reading about for months that the Georgia State Election Board put in, all of them were shut down by the Georgia courts, including the extremely conservative Georgia Supreme Court. So the risk is low. That's why the panic purveyors, I think, are from good. I'm not suggesting bad faith, but they're misapprehending the odds. Of course, low odds things sometimes do transpire, but it's low odds.
Well, I think that's important. I do think it's really we're a reality-based podcast here, and that's what our viewers and listeners have come to expect. So I appreciate that. I do think, I wonder whether potentially we may be setting the bar too low. I mean, one of the concerns that I do have, Norm, is that in an era of micro targeting, in an area of a lot of information, we now are going to have closer elections with disinformation flowing the way it is, with micro targeting of electorates. We're going to get closer results perhaps than we have in the past. I don't know whether that's going to happen.
It could happen.
Possible.
And this is a much closer polling election than we've typically seen in the past.
Sure.
And of course, but on the other hand, polling is unpredictable, so it could be a broader margin in either direction.
I agree with that as well. I think, the other thing that I will say is I agree with you 100% that there's a boy that cries wolf element to Trump.
Mm-hmm.
He, everything was stolen last time. If he loses again and he tries the same stunt, I actually think the media won't react the same way. At the time, the president of the United States was saying the Justice Department was investigating fraud, and the journalists didn't know what to do with that, because ordinarily that would be unbelievably breaking news, but there's a lot of reason to doubt it. Here, we're not going to have that. So I agree with you on that. I am concerned, though, about having local failures to certify in particular counties. I worry about certain groups of legislators, things like that, because there's been a lot of time by Trump to gin up of fear mongering. There's been a lot of fear mongering and conspiracy theories. I do think, you've alluded to the local prosecutions, and I will say, those got very little play in the media. The Michigan prosecution, Arizona prosecutions, in many ways, those may be the most important, because I would think that would deter a local Republican operative from doing something crazy.
I think all the prosecutions, the federal Trump prosecution, Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, and I think all of it has a deterrent effect. And all the bar complaints, people have lost Giuliani, Eastman, Cheeseborough. Janet Ellis has had bar discipline. Sidney Powell has been referred. There were hiccups with that. But when you look at the whole thing, the guilty pleas in the Georgia case by Cheeseborough and Ellis, it's not a very auspicious landscape for people. And Trump will pardon them all. The pardons don't affect state prosecutions. I think that I hope it'll have a salubrious effect that people are gambling with their law licenses here.
Well, the lawyers are on the front lines of democracy, and we really appreciate what you do, Norm.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me back and being such good friends. And it's a new, like the past since Trump took office, 2016, it's been like a full employment plan for lawyers, right? I remember when I first met, that's how I know the two of you, from being analysts together. I'm like, who is that Asha? Asha and I used to be in the green room with Sam, right? Sam
Yeah.
Vinograd. She was a regular with us. And Renato, first time I met him, was on the air. I'm like, who is that guy in Chicago? And so the analysis that y'all have provided for the past 8 years, incredible, about what's going on is so valuable. And I'm so glad to call you my colleagues and my friends. And thanks for having me back.
You're welcome, Norm. And let's hope for the best for Tuesday. Otherwise, it's from the green room to the gulag for the three of us.
Indeed.
Okay, guys. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Norm. Okay, take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
So, Renato, before we go, for people who might be contemplating some international travel, in their future, we have some exciting news.
Yes, I think both of us need some travel. So this is an exciting opportunity to travel with us.
Yeah. So for our listeners and viewers, Renato and I are going to be hosting an 11-day cruise next July from Copenhagen to Iceland. I don't know how to say the name of the city that we end in. And
Reykjavik, are we ending in
Reykjavik? Is that how you say it?
I think so.
And we want our listeners to join us.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be a first class trip. And it's a small boat. This is not like some massive mega cruise like you're going on with thousands of people. It's going to be a small cruise. You're going to not only run into us, but we're going to have events and we're going to have opportunities for you guys to talk with us and discuss. And when this opportunity was presented to us, we thought it would be fun. It's just a fun way for us to get to know some of the people who we've gotten to know over the years. And maybe we've gotten to know you in Twitter comments or maybe in YouTube comments or in messages on Facebook, or Instagram, but this is an opportunity for us to get to know you face to face and to enjoy some time, hopefully the world being in a better place and us relaxing and having exciting conversations about all the things to come.
Right. So we're going to be sailing on Oceania Cruise Lines on the luxurious Serena with its award-winning dining and service. And we will be making stops in Oslo, Norway, and Sweden, and also stops in Britain and Denmark before we get to Iceland. And I have the information here. If people are interested, you should call the travel store at 800-777-6540. That's 800-777-6540. Or you can go to our websites, or you can go to my Instagram. I'm just really excited. I love cruising.
Yeah, I'm a big fan too. My wife and I were so excited about this. We actually are doing an Oceania cruise in December into a different location.
Oh, really?
And yes, and we've done a couple other cruises together over the last few years. So we're excited about this, and it's going to be a fun opportunity to get to know everybody and also see a part of the world that I've never seen before. Never been to Norway,
Me
never been
neither.
to Iceland.
Yeah. And you know what's funny? We were supposed to do one to the Mediterranean, but that got canceled because apparently it's now just simply too hot to go there in July. So we switched itineraries.
This will be perfect. I think that the weather's going to be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So
fun.
Yeah, I haven't been on a cruise since I went on a Disney cruise in 2019, right before COVID hit.
Wow.
So I'm excited, and I hope that we have some people join us.
Absolutely. So check out not only the number that Asha gave you, we'll try to put details below on our YouTube as well, and we'll have it on all of our various social media.